Hello everyone, I hope you're having a good day. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Edwin Branchistivo with the last three-digit student number 169. So in this video, I will be acting as the moderator, and today we are going to present our material titled Introduction to Translation based on the article Translation Techniques Revisited, a Dynamic and Functionalist Approach by Lucia Molina and Amparo Hurtado Alvear. Let me begin with the background of this study. The article addresses a major issue in translation study, which is the lack of clarity in distinguishing important concepts such as methods, strategies, and techniques. In many previous studies, these terms are often used interchangeably, which cause confusion, especially for students and researchers when analyzing translations. As translation studies develop, the perspective also shifts toward a functionalist approach, where translation is no longer seen simply transferring words from one language to another. Instead, it is viewed as a dynamic process influenced by context, purpose, and cultural aspects. To solve these problems, Molina and Alvear propose a clear and more structured framework where translation techniques are used to practical tools to analyze how translators make decisions and achieve equivalence between source and target text. In the framework, there are 18 translation techniques in total. However, in this presentation, we will only focus on 3 specific techniques, namely substitution, variation, and transposition, as shown in our slides. Each of these techniques has its own function. For example, the first one, substitution, is used to replace verbal expression with non-verbal paralinguistic elements such as gestures or sounds. Variation focuses on adjusting tone, style, or dialect to match social and cultural contexts. And transposition involves changing grammatical structure to make the transition more natural and readable. Before we continue, it's also important to understand that these translation techniques have 5 main characteristics, such as affecting the result, being classified by comparison, affecting micro units, being discursive, and functional. Now, to explain these characteristics in more detail, I would like to hand over to the next presenter, Salman, with the last 3 digits to the number 156.
Now, before we look at our 3 techniques, we need to answer a very important question. What exactly is translation technique according to Molina and Alvear? So, in the 2002 research, they redefined techniques as instruments of textual analysis. They noticed that many people were confusing methods which actually affect the whole book and strategies, which are the internal processes, with the techniques. So, Molina and Alvear argue that a technique is actual result we see in the text. To help us identify them, they provided 5 essential characteristics that we should all keep in mind today. First, techniques actually affect the result because they aren't just a plans in the translator's head, they are the visible shift in the final translation. Second, they are classified by comparison, so you cannot identify a technique by looking only at the translated sentence alone. So you must compare the target text against the source text to see the movement that language that happened. Third, they affect macro units. While a method might be literal for entire document, a technique works on the small stuff, individual words, phrases, or specific sentences. Fourth, they are discursive and contextual, so there is no one-size-fits-all rule. A translator chooses a technique based on the surrounding context and the genre of the text. And finally, they are functional. So this is the heart of our presentation. We don't choose techniques randomly, because we choose them to fulfill a specific purpose, whether it's to sound natural, to be funny, or to respect a culture. Understanding these 5 traits is the secret to moving beyond word-for-word translation and becoming a cultural mediator. Now, let's see these traits come to life in our first technique, which is substitution, which will be explained by our friend. Thank you.
Alright guys, for the next slide, we have substitution, and for example, we have three example. Okay, so I'm gonna explain the definition of substitution first. So in simple terms, substitution is a linguistic change where we replace spoken words with paralinguistic cues, which mean body gesture or specific sounds, or the other way around. We do this to make our communication more natural and efficient depending on our culture. So in here, we have three examples. For the first one is dislike. Let's look at how we express dislike. In Indonesia, when we are annoyed, we often clap our tongue or berdecak, right? So berdecak is like we make the sound. So this sound is a substitute for saying I don't like that. And then, however, in English-speaking cultures, people rarely clap their tongue for this. Instead, they roll their eyes. So, she rolled her eyes is a paralinguistic substitute for the sentence she hated. Same meaning but different gesture. And then we have example number 2 is respect. So in here, in our culture, we have salim, right? When I kiss my parents' hand, that physical action is substituted for a verbal expression of respect and farewell. So, but in England or America, they don't really do salim. Their cultural substitute for a respectful goodbye is a hug. And if we say she hugged her mother before departing, the hug replaced the whole ritual of respect that we usually show through salim. So for the last example, we have how to telling people to be quiet. So even the way we ask for silence is a substitute. We use sh in Indonesia, but in English we use sh like that. So, in conclusion, substitution is about how we trade our words for gestures and sounds to make sure our message is delivered perfectly to their culture. So, that's all for me. Thank you. For the next slide will be explained by my friend.
My name is Naura Alifa Putri Hevansha and my student number is 045. So the next technique that I want to talk about is transposition. Transposition is a technique used to change the grammatical category. It means that we change the grammatical structure from the source text to the target text, but the meaning stays the same. The first example is from descriptive setting. For example, in Indonesian, we said, pagi hari di dapur terasa hangat dengan aroma kopi yang baru diseduh. In English, we said, the kitchen felt warm in the morning with the smell of freshly brewed coffee. The phrase of kopi yang baru diseduh becomes freshly brewed coffee. In Indonesian, it uses a noun, conjunction, adjective, and passive verb. But in English, it becomes adverb, adjective, and noun. So we can see that the grammatical structure changed, but the meaning is still the same. It talks about coffee that was just made. Second example is emotional connection. For example, in Indonesian, we said, dia merasa gugup saat menunggu hasil ujiannya. In English, we said, she felt nervous while waiting for her exam results. The phrase of hasil ujiannya becomes her exam results. In Indonesian, it is all noun. In English, it is also noun, but the difference is in the word order. So, even if the category looks similar, the structure is still adjusted to fit English grammar. And the third example is vivid imagery. For example, in Indonesian, we said, suara notifikasi ponsel berbunyi berkali-kali di ruangan yang sepi. In English, we said, the sound of phone notification kept ringing in the quiet room. In this example, many parts change. The structure in Indonesian is quite different from English, so almost all elements are rearranged. But again, the meaning stays the same. We still understand the situation clearly. So from this example, we can see that the transposition is actually very common in translation. We don't always translate word by word, but we adjust the structure to make it sound natural. And the next explanation will be explained by Raski.
Alright, now let's talk about the variation. Now the definition of variation here involves from adjusting linguist and paralinguist elements that affects how a text sounds, such as its tone, style, or even the dialect. And here we got 3 examples of it. The first one here is social dialect, which sounds like "I'm gonna go now, y'all," by using Southern American dialect. The second one here is "Gue cabut dulu ya guys," by using Jakarta slang. The second one here is textual tone. "Give me that book." Siniin bukunya. The third one here is formal and informal. "Excuse me sir, may I have a moment of your time?" Permisi pak, boleh mengganggu waktunya sebentar? Next one here will be explained by my friend. Thank you.
Alright, to wrap everything up, here's our final recommendation for each technique. First, the substitution technique. Substitution should be used when dealing with the cultural differences, especially gestures or even the visual elements. The goal is not to translate literally, but to keep the same function or meaning for the audience itself. Second is the variation technique. Variation technique is best when tracing the tone, the slang, or character voice. It helps maintain the personality and the social identity of the speaker itself, so the translation still feels alive and more natural. The third and the final technique is the transposition technique. Transposition is useful for adjusting grammar by changing the structure so that we can make the sentence sounds more natural and avoid awkward or overly formal translation. So overall, our main takeaway is this: a good translator doesn't just translate the word, but they adapt the form to preserve the true message of itself. That's it from all of us today. I hope that our presentation can be helpful for everyone, and I hope that everybody has a very great day. Thank you guys, and see you guys next time.